The term mystic and mysticism is experiencing a revival in the spirit of this age, just like how we see a revival of many ancient wisdom and ancient knowledge. And so because of that, it's really important to understand what we're talking about when we say mystic or mysticism, because that can be thrown around and mean many things. And none of them might be like really at the heart or really the core of what it is to be a mystic or mysticism. Because there's many different branches of mysticism. So if you hear one concept that's coming from one branch of mysticism, that may not be representing all of the branches of mysticism, but there are many core, or what I would consider overlapping themes that would now be what is considered a mystic or mysticism. And then there's just many things that are still under that category, but I mean, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. So it's not like the term mystic or mysticism means only one thing and that it's all very exalted. Many things I would not consider exalted at all within that category. And still within there are, once again, core themes that can be focused on and even basically agreed on. So that's what I'm going to be teaching today. The first one, and this is the one that is above all the rest, meaning that this is the most core theme in all traditions and branches of mysticism, and that is ascent of the soul. So, ascent of the soul is where any system, any mystic or system of mysticism teaches some sort of pathway, and it's all under this broader category that you could call ascent of the soul. So ascent of the soul is like a trope. It's a trope because whether you call it one thing in one branch or whether you call it another name in another branch, they're all experiencing this one thing that is core to mysticism, which is they go into an altered state of consciousness. And in this altered state of consciousness, which means they are not inside your everyday waking level of consciousness. They're not attuned to this level of consciousness that we're at. And so through any means, whether it's through breath work or many other means, they attune themselves into altered states of consciousness. Just like how in this age, what's really popular, but we don't call it altered states of consciousness, is when we do brainwave work. So when we're going into a different brainwave state, we don't consider that I'm going into an altered state of consciousness, but that's exactly what we're doing. We just have different terminology and verbiage in our modern culture for it. So mysticism, the core theme is ascent of a soul, and ascent of the soul is done through altered states of consciousness. This is even where we get the term gnosis from. Gnosis can mean many things. I've done 2 videos so far on gnosis. I can do many more, and I will. But in this respects, gnosis is getting your own direct experience from something in usually an altered state of consciousness of some sort. Now, in this altered state of consciousness, you travel. And so this is why even modern people who are going out of body are still being mystics, because many mystics back in the day were going out of body, and we just don't have the same terminology for it. But when I go and I view it, they were going out of body, and that's how they were traveling and understanding these different realms and these different layers of reality, what we would call in this age densities. So if we're in the 3rd density, and then there's the 4th density and the 5th, and so on and so forth, when you travel or ascend into the higher densities, that's what mysticism and mystics were calling realms. And they were going out of body to do that, or through their light body. And so when it comes to ascent of the soul, there's, I guess you could call it a goal. It's really just the natural byproduct that happens, but it's emerging. And so the core theme of mysticism is going into an altered state of consciousness, which is actually very common. But doing that to go into an ascension process, and that ascension process, the soul is the one who's going through an ascension to merge. The number one thing about mysticism is it's always going to be through a union or merge. even if a person didn't know that they were a mystic because they did not have that terminology and they were doing this, how you would know that they're doing what a mystic does or in what mysticism is because of union. Union is the core theme of all threads of mysticism. It is union, even in Tantra. So from the East to the West, from ancient to modern, there's always a union. And that's a union with the higher self. Or we could even consider a higher union, which happens many times as well, a union with source. And so when it's happening at the level of source, that stays with you far longer, and that continues to work on you far longer. So when it's working on you, and we call that entrainment, because we call that calibration. It's called a calibration process. We could also look at it as like a balancing process or an entrainment process. But when you're going through this attunement or calibration process, you might put all these different labels on it and you won't know it. And someone else who you go to and they don't know what's going on and they don't have this concept or they don't have this higher awareness because they haven't been to that level of initiation, they won't know. So you'll point to something that you won't know, and then you'll just project yourself onto it, or the lack of knowing onto it, or judgments onto it. But what's really happening is that once you merge at the level of source, that stays with you. That's not just a peak experience like other things that you can merge with, but yet still have the free will, shall you say, the choice to be able to go back to your old self or recalibrate with this merging process that you've experienced. So ascent of the soul is very core to not just all of mysticism, but to the whole spiritual opus, the magnum opus, the great work, because it is the great work. And so it doesn't stop. But even though it doesn't stop, it's a process that can still be a little nebulous if we put too many titles, restrictions, judgments, limitations on it, and start putting the 3D mind over a much large spiritual process. And so that's what's really important to bring forward when it comes to mysticism in general first. The second is the law of one. Because when we're merging or when we're creating union, it's not just for a novel experience. It's for developing the consciousness of the above. And through that merger, which once again we could call direct experience, through that merger, what our consciousness is receiving is the law of one. And so many of you might know the law of one as a book. And that will be probably where many people's knowledge of the law of one taps out. The law of one is the title of a book, but it's also been the title of past books or the knowledge inside past books before. The law of one is not a book. The law of one is the core theme of mysticism, which is the merger into oneness. It's like, what's that oneness? It's not different from the law of one. It's the same oneness. There's not two onenesses. There's the law of one, and then there's oneness. So anytime we're looking at some sort of like exalted figure, whether it's an ascended master or it's what we would consider God's source, even just our higher self, whatever it may be, we love them, we revere them, we respect them, because they're the living embodiment of the law of one. I'll put it this way too, just to like really drive the point home. There's no such thing as a mystic who has not experienced the law of one, who does not know it fully, inside out, without reading a book, backwards and forwards, because that is what mysticism is. It's that merging into unity, that union from the first step, right? Which is, it's ascending. Why is it ascending? The soul is ascending to merge into oneness. Why is that oneness? To get the law of one. to download fully the law of one and then to live by the law of one. So the law of one may be the name of a book, but to not know the law of one is to not know mysticism, plain and simple. If you'd like to have more knowledge of how the law of one has been transmitted throughout multiple ages, there's this book, The Children of the Law of One. That's the name of the book. It has to do with this battle of the law of one, even in the time of Atlantis. I think the author's name it's one of those code word names. It's because, they came from the law of one. And so they don't reveal their real names while they're transmitting knowledge to pass it on and to preserve it through each age. But I think it's like pineal. But beyond that, even Edgar Cayce talked about the law of one. So what you'll see is that any form of mystic or channeler or intuitive is going to have things that are under the category of nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun is definitely a mystic phrase for saying that there's some things that are just objective. Just like how you see some like very attuned, high level or like super trained out of body experiencers in this age, and they will transmit to you. They will tell you that the etheric realm's objective. It's not like the astral realm where it can be manifestations or projections of your own psyche. The etheric realm is objective. And that's what this term nothing new under the sun means. It doesn't mean that there's truly nothing new under the sun. There is. But what it's saying is that there's an objective reality. And that objective reality, that landscape that everything else is, able to play with, but cannot change, this immutable objectiveness behind it, that's kind of like the backdrop of it, is the law of one. So you might say by now, if you don't know, what is the law of one? And that is something that you can hear, you can learn in a book. You'll always have it transmitted in every age. It will always be preserved in every age. It will always be channeled and taught in every age. And not even just by one source, but there might be more stronger sources, more clearer sources, and definitely far larger sources than others. But it is immutable and objective. And what that is that we are all source. We are all one. There is one. That is the thing that is nothing new under the sun. It might be hard to digest and to be unveiled to someone. And then from there, they will maybe perhaps if they cannot truly embody that truth or even just attune with it over a long period of time, then they will go through different means and different ways to kind of make a justification so that they can, distort that. But it would be more of the task, it just depends on the person's consciousness, but it would be more of the task instead of trying to distort or bypass that, to actually face that and then work with the implications of that. That might be hard for many people to do, though, because if we face that we're God at the end of the day and that everything else is God at the end of the day, there's so many ways that truth can be distorted. And there's so many implications we might not be able to face because of that. And there's so many structures, spiritual or not, that we won't be ready to let go of. And so we can even hide in our human. And that would be one of the realms of the false light, but the false light is another day. So mysticism has two core themes. It has more, which I will cover in another video, but I think we should just digest this right now because this is a lot to break down. It's the law of one, which is we are all source, experiencing that oneness through many faces, many facets. And even the law of one comes with far deeper implications, even at a physics level, even at unity consciousness level. So it's not just even the truth that I said, which is we're all one. It's deeper than that, but that oneness, that we are all source consciousness, and the level of eternalness and creative life force that implies could be really hard for a limited mind, or one that is still holding on to whatever belief systems are currently comfortable for it. So that ascent of the soul, merging or union with the higher self, or even at the level of source, those three are the core themes of mysticism. That's why you see Rumi make the poetry after going into spinning, which is another way to get into altered states of consciousness, and then just transmit all of these love poems to what? What were those love poems to? It was to source. It was the understanding. You know, mystics have been burned at the stake for admitting this truth, that once they had been transmitted the law of one, they've been burned at the stake for saying it too loud. So, but in other cultures and in other regions of the world, they were going into that, and it was almost something that was so accepted in the culture that it was just kind of like the mystics at that point were still leading the way, but were almost revered rather than oppressed. They were almost revered for their shamanic role of leading the way in those realms. And then you see later on that tradition of shamanism move into the Western world as Gnosticism. So whichever region of the world or whichever culture, ancient or not, what we see is the core themes of mysticism being the union of the soul through an ascension process called Ascent of the Soul with its higher self, with the macrocosm. And then we see from that union merging constant themes, which always is a way of just saying oneness. So there's always some sort of understanding of merging being the way. And then through that oneness, the law of one. So ascent of the soul, union, aka merger, and then from that, the law of one. Those are the three strongest core themes of all mysticism and mystics. And then from there, you can put your creative conduit at play. And as much as there's nothing new under the sun, there's also a horrible, horrible travesty to replicate, which is even called repetitious in vain. It is false to replicate so identical. And what that means is that if you don't have any creative agency, then there's not even enough soul that was truly developed. And so why I'm pointing that out now is because a lot of times in this age, many people are going through a lot of kind of like internal judgment, and they're internally judging themselves so much that it will be hard for them to truly access and harness their own intuition, right? Because we emphasize one value or attribute over another. And sometimes people are emphasizing or attributing a lot of slavery programming or false light programming, which is, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to receive? Who do you think you are to be a creative conduit? So, and then you have a lot of other things going on as well too. Like you have the ability for many people to be so tapped in that they don't have to go through the initiation processes that they had to in past ages. Those are past energies. They served their purpose. So we're also not starting at scratch at all. In fact, I would even reinvent the name of a mystic in this age, and it is to develop more than they had in past ages. Because to repeat and to be repetitious in vain was never the point. You'll even see past mystics reincarnate now in this age, and it's to add on a new, an enhancement, a new development in their own trajectory. And when we can't rise to that current and keep up with our own development, and we get stuck and stagnant in past ages and then get really calcified and blocked there, that's actually going to just get mirrored to us in all these different ways, as judgments, as resentful, as the false light. So also, This might not be a core theme of mysticism, but what's very important is that you can tell through the pliability, right? They're not like super rigid. In this age, it would be more through the heart's opening, which plays out through youthfulness. I hope that this has helped teach Ascent of the Soul. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.